One of the most lightning-fast drummers of the 1970s was American Alphonse Mouzon, who played on the first Weather Report album in 1971 before striking out on his own, and from his 1977 album Virtue, the appropriately named title track. Hear him just like pulverize those toms, but also hear how the bass is like doubling up on his accents. And then that melody comes in. We've got a definite theme here, but the rhythm section is just like pulverizing it all the way through. I love it how the different instruments come in and do their own complement on the theme. Like first we had the keyboard handling it, now we've got sax. That is Gary Bartz on alto saxophone. And the bass that we've been hearing all along that's been doubling up on Alphonse Mouzon's like tom, snare, rolls, just bombardment is Welton Gite, or Gite. Now it's really getting kind of almost free form. You basically just have that rhythmic component that's holding it together. Notice how after all those like kind of free notes and sustained notes, he was kind of working the theme back in there, Gary Bartz on the sax, and those keyboards that have been kind of going on underneath it just faintly are played by Stu Goldberg. See, he's playing kind of like a more fractured, looser version of the theme right here. Lots of filigree there from Stu Goldberg. This is now basically like kind of like a trio here of Welton, Gite, Stu Goldberg, and Alphonse Mouzon. There's that tone of the electric piano, just the way it sparkles, simmers. Now this might be a mini Moog. Notice how Alphonse Mouzon has just been going non-stop throughout this whole thing, just pulverizing, just so many accents, like 1,000 accents per bar. Notice how in that mini Moog solo, it too went kind of into free form for a bit there, and then it slowly, the theme, it kind of reconvened around the theme, somewhat looser than it had been heard, and then finally you get the recapitulation of that da-no-no-no, da-no-no, that holds it together. This Welton Gite fellow was only 21 years old at the time this album was recorded. According to Discogs, this is only like his second or third credit. Bass has such an earthy, growling tone to it. I think Magma would have really been impressed. I wonder what pedals he may have been using on his bass. But some of the, sound-wise, it reminds me a little bit. It, I think I'm hearing a bit some reverb. Tonal-wise, I am thinking of the bass solo in Sing Ring and the Glass Guitar by Utopia, which came out the same year. And I'm also thinking somewhat of Chris Squire's bass tone on some of the tracks in the Tormato LP. It may have just been a thing around that time, which came out the following year. It may have been like like an effect that they were putting on the bass. Of course, his playing is very different from those two. He's a lot like just busier all the way throughout and can hit a lot more notes. Just amazing for a 21-year-old. Hear the fizzy keyboard synthesizer, the Mini Moog now gain all like bubbly. Wow. Yeah, yeah, our bassist there, Welton Gite, who was just dueling Alphonse Mouzon the whole time, just not laying up. He has his first Discogs credit in 1976, and this is like the second, at least, album with an actual cover attached to it that he is credited on. And the following year, quite appropriately, he would play on Gary Bartz's Love Affair album. Gary Bartz's attempted kind of disco funk crossover. Gary Bartz, of course, the veteran of a number of free jazz albums from the early 70s, starting in like 1969. During the early 70s, he was kind of at the top of his game, and with the NTU troupe. Yeah, the albums from like around 1972, like I've Known Rivers and Other Bodies. Yeah, that one. And Alphonse Mouzon was on to album 5 at this point, I believe. Yeah, he was on the first Weather Report album, the self-titled one, the one with Orange Lady, Milky Way, those really psychedelic, in a silent way type ambient jazz funk tracks. Before they got more kind of, when they were kind of really loose. That album is a real standalone in their catalog, stylistically, sound-wise. And in 1973, debuted as a leader with The Essence of Mystery on Blue Note, followed by 3 further titles for that label over the next 3 years, culminating with the Man Incognito in 1976. At which point he got a lot more prolific on other people's recordings as well. Played on a Joachim Kahn record, Hip. In fact, was a co-headliner on that, Hip Elegy. Forgive me if I'm flubbing any pronunciations here. I've never heard them pronounced out loud. And was on a record with Albert Mangelsdorf, a German guy, the same on MPS Records, very prolific jazz label of European jazz. Live at the Berlin Jazz Days. He was on that album the same year that Virtue came out. And also the same year as Virtue. Wow, very prolific, perhaps his banner year overall. He did a duet album with Larry Coryell, Back Together Again. So a guy who was really who just had all this uncontainable energy during the 70s. And arguably the best drummer that America produced, perhaps even, I mean, based on the rapid fire pace of that, I could almost say, yeah, more so than Billy Cobham, Tony Williams. I don't like to really compare people. Everyone's got their strengths, their talents, but if when it comes to just lightning filigree, lightning tom rolls, just 1,000 accents per second, and just with such precision. And Alphonse Mouzon, he, if anyone was entitled to call an album virtue, um, it would be him. Alphonse Mouzon, the track Virtue from the album of the same name, released on MPS Records in 1977, with Gary Bartz on saxophone, Welton, Gite on bass, and let's see, who were some of the other guys that we heard on there? On the keyboards we heard, Stu Goldberg, and what was he up to before? Let's take a look at his credits. Stu Goldberg also did some stuff with Larry Coryell on MPS Records. And an album with John Lee and Jerry Brown. Oh, that's something to bookmark there. Oh, and was featured on a few records by Toto Blank's Electric Circus. So I've probably seen him around, just haven't really quite taken as much notice to the name. Although I don't know how many recordings that he's been on were quite as demanding as the one that we just heard. And and that was it. Just those four created all that sound, all that density. Can you believe it? It's amazing just what a few guys who can really play their instrument. I mean, imagine your typical rock band. I mean, to think of how just Welton, Gite, and Alphonse Mouzon, the bassist and drummer, were just holding it throughout so much of the piece. It makes me think, how many rock bands could, if they were halved down to just their bassist and drummer, could still command an audience for, minutes on end, for, the better part of a show? I can't think of I can't think of many drum bass combos that can quite fill up the... Well, let's see. Etron Foulet Leblanc is one of the few I'm thinking of. Ferdinand Richard and Guigou Chenevier. Those two, I could probably just sit and watch for a half hour just doing their thing with no one else on stage. And these two guys I could. But I can't think of... It makes me think of this movie that came out in the 80s. It was about like some band from a small town who were going through some ups and downs. And there was this one scene where they were halved when they were supposed to be playing at some talent contest or some high school event or something, and only the bassist and drummer were there, and they tried to carry the slack, and they were booed off stage almost instantly because they didn't have the chops to they were so pedestrian that they could barely hold audiences for more than 10 seconds before tomatoes were getting thrown on stage. So anyway, Alphonse Mouzon, Virtue from the album Virtue, one of the fifth of consecutive excellent release that he put out during the 1970s, Alphonse Mouzon. For more Rubies and Sapphires from the Alphonse Mouzon catalog, this album and the others, see the directory of albums by American jazz funk artists in the links below. Like and subscribe to know when more videos like this are coming out, just about every day at this point. And until next time, this is Zaragon, the world's most ear-traveled trimaximalist, signing off.